Hi everybody, welcome back to an episode of Barely Controlled Entropy. This is episode 4 where we cover our study strategies and what has worked and what hasn't worked for us during our 2 semesters here.
Yeah, we're coming up towards the end.
Yeah.
You know, it's the day of recording this is we've got around 3 weeks until the end of finals, or the week of finals, basically. And so, realistically, these next few weeks are going to be admittedly busy as far as schoolwork goes for all of us. So we thought, what better time to discuss what has worked for us in terms of getting work done and what hasn't. I think for me, the biggest thing is just really planning ahead, because it's not like the professor's going to hold your hand through anything anymore. And as great as they are of a resource in terms of reaching out to them and for support on schoolwork, which we'll get into a little more later, it definitely is more based off of your own effort and management of your time and effort in terms of figuring out what needs to be done right now as opposed to what can wait a few days. So I think obviously it's going to be different for each of us, as I'm sure it is, and I'm sure it's going to be different for all of you listening. As a result, you're going to have to try and experiment to see what does work for you, because what works for me probably might not work for Anurima. What works for Anurima might not work for Alan. What works for Alan might not work for Christian. I'm pretty sure that none of us have the exact same habits or strategies. But to that point, we're all still surviving.
Yeah, and I think a lot of a person's study strategies and things like that sort of depends on the type of classes that they're taking. So in, say, intro bio and intro chem, we have a set number of assignments that we have to complete each week. So every single week there's going to be a chemistry problem set. Every single week there's going to be a chemistry pre-lab. Every 2-3 days there's going to be bio readings and bio quizzes that you have to take, at least for the past few semesters. And because of that, if you decide that, okay, on Monday I'm going to do the problem set, on Tuesday I'm going to do the pre-lab, I'll do the readings interspersed throughout the week, as long as you sort of, like Zhihan was saying, plan out when you're going to do things and try and integrate concrete set deadlines that are already given to you by professors into your daily schedule, into your planner, so that you're doing the same things at the same time every week. It becomes a lot easier to form a routine, and then you can build and add your assignments from other classes onto that base schedule that you've already created. So that's something that I found really helpful, and I'm definitely not the most productive person. Literally 2 minutes ago we were talking about how I slept for 16 hours and love naps, so take all of this with a grain of salt.
Well, actually, the thing is, taking care of yourself is also an obviously important aspect of it. We can talk a little bit about burnout, which is something that does occur pretty easily when you are kind of grinding through a semester. For example, our fall semester, we did not have any break. We went straight from August 24th or something like that, straight through the week before Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
I think the most we had was one random Wednesday off.
Yeah, it was one random day.
To be fair, great day. But also, that's
spent a lot of it sleeping.
13 straight weeks of work. So I don't know about you guys, I was feeling pretty spent by the end.
Definitely.
And when I went home, I technically only had one last thing to finish, which was due at the start of December. But I spent the first 3 or 4 days up until Thanksgiving weekend just decompressing. I don't think I really put much thought into that assignment or really thought about it at all. Forget making progress on it. And I think that the importance of knowing when that you kind of are at the end of your upper limit of labor power and knowing when to take a break is deeply important. I just referenced a term that labor power that we've covered in class, which is why Christian's giggling to himself right now. I apologize.
More like sighing.
But it's a similar concept. If you overwork yourself, you're going to be used up in less time. And so the importance of not overworking yourself and knowing where your own limits are is really core to having a successful semester or college experience as a whole. Mm-hmm. So I think for me, what the big thing is routine, like Anurima said. Like, I've gotten into a pretty set routine in terms of, at least with readings. I'm in 4 reading and writing intensive classes. Mm-hmm. I do not have the problem sets of the pre-labs that a bio or a chem or a pre-med student may have. I, on the other hand, do occasionally have essays, which are interspersed pretty, not randomly, but like, usually they won't line up in a completely detrimental way, although they can and they have.
Yeah. I think kind of following on from what Zhihan said about burnout, I think it's actually quite important to have a varied course load. So I think for full semester, I had a better time because I had like 2 STEM courses, but I also had my first year seminar, which was writing and reading intensive. And so kind of like I was overworked when it comes to problem sets. I could, go on and do some reading and vice versa. And I think kind of following on from what everyone else has said, a routine is very important because, you can't experiment for the first 2 or 3 weeks and you figure out what kind of works and when you realistically have to get your work done by, which is not necessarily the deadline, Like, for example, in the math class I'm taking, the problem set is due every Monday, but then you have to do the readings before you can do the problem set. So, I figured that I have to get my readings done by Friday, otherwise I couldn't finish my problem set in time. So you can't figure out these things and then you just have to force yourself to stick with it. And another thing to kind of consider is kind of like how the office hours and TA sessions kind of line up with your schedule. So, you want to make sure that you kind of utilize those to the maximum instead of leaving it to the last minute and then kind of not knowing what to do afterwards.
And that's a really good point. I think especially with science classes, going to office hours like before the pre-lab is due or before the problem set is due can be really, really helpful. So having all of that written down somewhere, whether it's like Google Calendar or you use like a physical planner or some other method of organizing and scheduling your time is really, really important.
Yeah, like Anurima last semester convinced me to buy a physical planner and it helped immensely. A lot of my work is getting readings done, so not like Zhihan was saying, not a whole lot of problem sets or even like things that are necessarily for credit consistently, but a lot of times those huge sets of reading for a bunch of classes can seem very daunting, and then I know that a lot of times when I see like 6 different readings for 3 classes, I'll do like in a 2-day span or something like that. It makes me not want to do any of them just because it feels so overwhelming. But just like breaking things down, even like in the process of like writing them down on paper, is something that I've found very, very helpful in helping me actually approach getting them done.
There's a lot to be said about just like actually starting, especially with like, for me, the actual act of starting an essay is probably more difficult than like finishing one, just because it is a slightly daunting kind of experience. But once you get going, it becomes a lot easier. You gain a bit of momentum, and it's a lot easier to just stay focused on it. But the actual act of starting something, be it a problem set, a reading, an essay, like basically any assignment, I think it can be a somewhat discouraging moment of realization of, oh, I still have more after this. But then in the actual act of doing it, you start to feel better about like, hey, this isn't that bad.
Yeah, I could kind of speak to that because I have severe essay anxiety. I've had it for my whole life, and I find it really difficult to, like, I associate essays with something that's really difficult and really challenging for me, and so a lot of times, kind of my anxiety kind of is around like the anxiety itself of writing an essay. So I kind of stressing out about essays more than actually writing it itself. So starting it is definitely good because once you've started, it's kind of like you're actually using your stress in a way that gets work done instead of just stressing out and not doing anything.
Yeah, I think there's like there must be something psychological about like once you actually get going on it, like you realize, hey, this is something that's actually doable for me, as opposed to something that's existing entirely in the abstract and kind of separated from you. I know that at my high school, I was talking to my advisor the other day because we were talking about classes for next year, and she asked me if I'd learned anything about myself, and I told her about how at my high school, my friends and I talked about how we learned how to like perfectly procrastinate everything, so we knew like exactly when we had to start it to get it done, like, by the deadline as opposed to before then. And I've learned here that won't fly at all. And my guess is that's the same at most colleges as well. For this semester, whenever I've had an essay in one class, I've consistently had an essay in 2 or 3 other classes due right around the same time. And I've found that I can't just like write all of them the night or two before. I actually have to plan them out and like get going on them more than a week in advance. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to get any of them done at all.
With that said, I think it's important to acknowledge that professors here are definitely here to help you. And like Anurima mentioned, like the importance of going to office hours, the importance of meeting with your professors if there is something coming up that you are unsure about or don't know what to do about. They are more than willing to at least give you guidance, if not, like basically get you going, like get you started on something. For example, like I have a research paper due, which is my final paper for one of my classes. And I met with my professor. I got a chance to basically talk through an outline, talk through the process of actually writing it. And suddenly that paper looks a lot less scary. And I think that just in general, reaching out to your professor and actually, just actually discussing it and like getting their input is so valuable here. Especially because, most of these professors, this is far from their first time teaching the course. And they will recognize that there are certain tests, certain essays that are going to be on the more difficult side. But they're also prepared to answer your questions about it as a result.
Yeah, I think this is kind of going in another direction, but this is also a very controversial kind of study habit that I have, which may or may not be working, but we'll see. So I think, on top of all of what we've been saying, I think it's important to stress that you can't have too rigid a schedule. So, like I used to, really like to plan, like I have to get this work done by then and all that. And I wouldn't really do a lot of social activities because, I'm scared that if I do it, then I'll be, behind work and all that. But I feel like, sometimes time is like a sponge, right? So kind of the less time you give to work, the more time that you give to work, the more time the work actually would take. So, like sometimes if you have something fun that you want to do on a certain day, or something just pops up, then it might be a good idea just to take it and then, figure out how you're going to catch up on work later, because sometimes having the stress of having to finish work quickly actually makes you more efficient.
I think there's credence to that, in that, like, I don't know, for me personally, the reason I personally do try to get a lot of stuff done ahead of time, and I do kind of have a rigid, like, not schedule, but like a kind of habit of what I do on weekends to prepare for the next week. But the main reason I do that is to provide myself with the space I need to say, if I do have a day where I'm not feeling up to doing work, or if I do have a busy day in terms of extracurriculars or something, that is something I can adapt to and I can get through. And that's why planning ahead is important. I think my biggest takeaway from your idea of like not being so rigid that your social life and like your other mental health suffers from it, I think it's more so that like you can't plan for everything. There will be unexpected occurrences, and it's not that my planning out is less to prevent the unexpected occurrences, but rather to accommodate it and to let it occur without it completely derailing you.
And sometimes you have to take those sort of spontaneous assignments in stride, because that's a reality. You're not always going to be told, like, you're not always going to be given 2 weeks before, your teacher says you have an exam. They might spring it on you and say, hey, by the way, we have an exam next week. Or, hey, in, 4 or 5 days, you have this quiz. And you're going to end up having to devote some of the time that you wanted to spend on other things to studying for that. Which is why I think, like Zhihan was saying, planning your day, planning your weeks, and what I think is important when you're planning your weeks, slight tangent here, is to like backload, or maybe forward load, I don't know, but try and do as many of your assignments as possible on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. That way, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday are spent doing like the spontaneous assignments that come up and socializing. Because a lot of the times you have the most momentum early on in the week, even though, Mondays are the dreaded day. It's still a lot easier to get stuff done when everyone else around you is also in that sort of grind mode. So back/forward loading, if you can, on work is definitely helpful.
Yeah. And, sorry, go ahead.
My thing with that is, like, in terms of which days I kind of choose to be, like, my work days, the heavier work days, rather, because I don't think that there's really many days over the course of the semester where I can honestly say that I've done zero work.
Zero at all.
I really don't know how many there are or how many there feasibly can be. But rather, knowing that on certain days, okay, I'm going to have to buckle down on this day, and that's okay. And if perhaps I end up missing some social events because of it, if that's the reality of the situation, I shouldn't try to fight it, right? Like, at some point you have to realize, okay, as much fun as, going to hang out with my friends for something would be, I have an assignment due tomorrow. And
Discipline, everyone.
Actively, making sure that you stay disciplined, but actively sabotaging yourself is more common than we like to think it is. And unfortunately, it does end up, like, derailing us some weeks. Because we do see, like, someone, like, wanting to go watch a movie one night or something and go, hey, that'd be really fun. I haven't been out of my room all day. And then you remember, wait, there's a reason why I haven't been out of my room all day. And that's because I have an essay due this week, on top of my already extensive coursework of readings. And it's very much a push and pull, but it's important that after one of those occurrences, you do take the time to decompress and you do go and do social stuff. Because it's impossible to survive otherwise, really. You get burnt out way too quickly to really survive a semester like that.
Like everything else in college, it's a fine balance.
And I think the more that the more effort you put into structuring things and forming those disciplined good habits, the less likely you are to have that, like, crumbling moment where you burn out, or where, like, one unexpected assignment ends up, like, throwing your whole week into, like, some snowballing nightmarish mess.
Which is another really important point, because I remember in high school, for us, whenever we had a test, all the other assignments for that class were on pause, and everything was just focused on that test. That's not the case here. You might have a test in your math class, but that doesn't mean you don't have lecture to attend. That doesn't mean you don't have a problem set that week. That doesn't mean that your other class is, for some reason, easing up on readings. So you still have to balance everything else that you're doing on a daily basis with additional, more heavily weighted assessments, whether that's an exam or in the form of an exam or an essay or some other project.
As we wrap up, let's try and summarize, like, what we've gone over today into, like, 3 general strategies that we think are, like, somewhat important. Because obviously, like we mentioned at the start, what works for me probably might not work for you. And a big part of your first year in college is going to be figuring out what does and doesn't work, and you finding your own balance. But I think it does boil down to, in some form, time management. Like, how much time do I have to devote to any given assignment? When does that need to start? When do I want that to be finished? Is that finish date before or at the deadline? And I think that ends up being the foundation for a lot of things.
Number 2 is definitely developing a routine, having a set, if not completely rigid, but still sort of flexible schedule that you can adapt to, and that adapts to your needs every week, every month, however you choose to create it.
And I think the third definitely is balance, right? Because yes, we're students. We're in school to learn, but you can't do one thing all the time. You need to take breaks. You need to do other things to give your brain a chance to reload and to stay fresh for the entirety of, admittedly, 13 weeks of straight school is difficult.
And that's not normal. So normally there's, I believe, like 2
Spring break.
breaks.
Yeah,
Spring break usually exists.
There's a fall break too, I think, which is shorter
Fall
than
break-
spring break.
Yeah, it's usually around Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
The
Just
way
like a
that
long
fall is
weekend,
structured is a
too.
bit different in that normally around Columbus Day, you'll maybe have a 3 or 4 day weekend.
Plus, there are like individual days off interspersed throughout the year.
And then obviously Thanksgiving break is a thing, but you come back and you basically have finals and then you're done for the semester. In a different semester, this would be different, but the same principles apply.
Absolutely.
Because even in, say, a 6-week or a 3-week period, you can still very easily get burnt out and have done more work than you should have. So again, I think the 3, time management, routine, and balance is what I would say is the 3 most core tenets of my study strategies.
I think all of ours, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I think the rest of it is just personalization. It's making it work for you.
And on that note, we will leave you at the end of episode 4 of Barely Controlled Entropy. See you all next week.
Where we're going to get a chance to discuss what resources there are at Amherst about, if something does go wrong. What can the college do and
How can they help you? Who do you talk to? All sorts of things.
All right. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.